lassù in montagna tu mi devi seppellire, tu mi devi seppellire. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e tu mi devi seppellire sotto l'ombra di un bel fior. Tutte le genti che passeranno, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Tutte le genti che passeranno mi diranno che bel fiore, e questo è il fiore del partigiano. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e questo è il fiore del partigiano, è morto per la libertà.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Greetings from wherever you're joining from across the world. I see people are joining from very many different places and really happy to see you all here today. I'm Min. I am Bayan USA's education officer and also a regional coordinator for Bayan Southern California. And I'll also let my other co-MC introduce himself.
Hi, this is Joseph as the Deputy Secretary General of Vine USA.
Yes. Okay. And we here with Bayan USA or Bagong Alyansa Makabayan, especially as the largest overseas chapter of Bayan Philippines, are very proud to host this launch of the 27th book in the Jose Maria Sison Reader Series titled Fascism, State Terrorism, and Wars of Aggression. For people who aren't so familiar with Bayan, Bayan is the National Democratic Movement or the Philippine National Democratic Movement's multi-sectoral alliance and campaign center. And of course, given the heightening problems in the Philippines, the basic problems of the Philippines, especially with bureaucrat capitalism, imperialism, and domestic feudalism, more and more Filipinos every day are being displaced. So that is also why we have national democratic mass organizations overseas, including here in the US, where we have almost 30 organizations as well and other overseas chapters. And really, Jose Maria Sison has contributed so much to the national democratic movement, not just in the Philippines, but even for us here overseas, and to the Filipino masses who are really toiling and struggling to change the society that they're living in. And with that, this book launch is also a part of the Kajoma Live Study movement. The study movement aims to promote the use of Kajoma's contributions to advance the struggle for Philippine national democracy, as well as the theory and practice of the Philippine Revolution and the World Proletarian Socialist Revolution. Kajoma, a Filipino patriot, proletarian revolutionary, and internationalist, led the reestablishment of the Communist Party of the Philippines in 1968. He was one of the world's most outstanding theoreticians in Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism. And so far in this Sison Reader Series, there have been 26 books launched. And an additional, other additional volumes are scheduled to be released more in 2024 and also 2025. And before we start off our program, I would actually like to read the opening remarks from the editor of this book, Julieta de Lima. And this is also in our slides, so people can read along. And on fascism, state terrorism, and wars of aggression. It consists of Jose Maria Sison's articles, speeches, statements, and interviews on the subject from 1965 to 2002. US imperialism has been the biggest terrorist force in the world since the end of World War II. It created Afghanistan in July 1978, the Mujahideen, from which the Taliban emerged in the 1990s and took over the Afghan government in 1996 in collaboration with Al-Qaeda, which is a CIA creation. In the course of World War I, both the Allies and the Central Powers used chemical and biological weapons extensively, in addition to conventional weapons. The massive disruptions in social life caused by World War I brought forth another horrendous but unintended result, the 1918 influenza pandemic that infected 1/3 of the world's total population and killed more than 50 million people. World War II saw the most unique and most unnecessary use of violence in its closing year, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, despite offer of surrender already made in Japan. Even in the absence of a global inter-imperialist war, US imperialism, together with its allies, has been responsible for the death of 25 to 30 million civilians since the end of World War II. The bulk of the victims perish in imperialist wars of aggression and imperialist back counter-revolution from China and Korea to Indochina, Indonesia, and other countries of Southeast Asia to South Asia and the Middle East, all the way to Africa and Latin America. Since the end of the Cold War, the US and its NATO allies have used a wide range of weapons to inflict the biggest destruction in the shortest period to the civilian population and social infrastructure, as in Iraq, Yugoslavia, Libya, and Syria. The inter-imperialist rivalry is more fraught than ever, with the danger of regional wars and even direct inter-imperialist war. As Lenin has pointed out, imperialism means war. There can be no peace in the world for as long as imperialist powers ride roughshod over the proletariat and the people, and they themselves are driven to struggle for a redivision of the world and enlarge their respective shares of economic territory and client states. The danger of a direct war among imperialist countries is highest when fascism takes power in any of them, as in the run-up to World War II. But the people in imperialist countries can act to oppose fascism and its ascendance by learning lessons from history and using the highly developed means of communications to arouse, organize, and mobilize the people against imperialist powers. Revolutionary mass movements must develop their strength within all countries to fight the rise of fascists, racists, chauvinists, and other reactionary currents. March 8th, 2024. So hopefully this can give you a better sense of the kind of book that we'll also be talking about today. Of course, this book launch is not a reading of the entire book. We actually really want to encourage people to take up the JMS study movement with us and also to inform more people about how important it is to come together and to really resist fascism, state terrorism, and wars of aggression, especially as we all probably feel how close the US elections are coming up, and how this will really impact not only the people here in the United States, but also globally. So with that, we'll also start off with a opening cultural. Okay. And this is called Pagkatapos ng Digma, or When the War is Over. And really, this song also is about not just what happens after war, but also the impacts of the current state of the world and the heightening fascism and attacks on the people, including activists and civilians, right? And as well as the importance of resisting and fighting and struggling throughout all of this, because at the end, there is hope, there is justice, there is victory, and there is peace. And this song was also sang at the International League of People's Struggle Fifth International Assembly during the Solidarity Night. So yeah, let's play it. Okay. Hopefully, folks felt really agitated and excited to take on what they were saying and singing in the song of for us to also really um, see how much we can win from struggling against wars of aggression, right? And how much justice can be achieved. And this is also actually a lot of what the book is covering that we'll be hearing about today. So with that, hopefully folks are excited to hear from some of the pictures that you're seeing here already. So I'll pass it off to Joseph.
Hi, yeah, so we're actually gonna have a couple of reactors today to speak to parts of the different parts that they have read from the book. Like we said, we're not gonna summarize the entirety of the book, um, uh, but we're going to give little snippets and just some quick reviews from a few of our guest speakers for today. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and welcome our first reviewer. Let me go ahead and pull up their introduction, and that will be Tabitha from Malaya. So Tabitha serves as the chairperson of Malaya Movement USA and has been part of its national leadership since 2019. Born and raised in Manila, she now resides in Portland, Oregon, where she is a member of the local Malaya chapter. Malaya Movement USA is a grassroots organization founded in 2018 in direct response to the rising fascism and dictatorship under former President Rodrigo Duterte. It organizes Filipinos across the U.S. to defend human rights, democracy, and sovereignty in the Philippines. So please welcome Tabitha.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Min and Vine USA for hosting this book launch and inviting us to speak today. Again, I am Tabitha with Malaya USA. So in Malaya USA, we have been developing our own study on fascism to really help our membership with a solid analysis of fascism, its historical roots, and its current manifestations as an anti-fascist movement of Filipinos in the diaspora. And Professor Sison's writings have been really an incredible resource for us. And it's something we go back to clarify some things and really strengthen our own analysis of fascism. Beyond his contributions to the revolutionary movement in the Philippines, as we've heard already, his works really have no doubt contributed to the movements for social change and liberation all across the world, as we will hear today. So it's very much an honor to be speaking on his works with y'all today. So for this launch, we were asked to react to the social basis of the fascist state. This text was written by Professor Sison just 2.5 months after the overthrow of the fascist dictator Marcos Sr. during the 1986 People Power Uprising. Addressed to the Philippine Social Science Council, it very succinctly explains the roots of fascism on a global level, how it specifically played out in the Philippines under Marcos Sr., and what to expect under the administrations to come. Again, just 2.5 months after the Marcos ouster. In the first section titled Fascism as World Phenomenon, Professor Sison drills down into the historical roots of fascism, placing it in the context of capitalist crisis and exploitation, imperialism and its constant drive for more territory and exploits, and resulting in what Professor Sison calls an open rule of terror that launches wars of aggression to redivide the world. We are then introduced to this idea of a first fascist state in Italy in 1922, and then others cropped up in Europe and Japan, reeling from the aftermath of World War I and the impending crisis that people were experiencing. In this section, Professor Sison really lays out the features of a fascist state. And to paraphrase again, please read this essay. To paraphrase Professor Sison, he states that the ruling clique headed by an autocrat who rose to prominence through rabid anti-communist, anti-worker, and chauvinism that appealed to the ruling elite and other reactionary classes. So this is necessary to the building up of a fascist state. What is also necessary is coercive apparatuses of the state. This can look like the military, other weaponized, militarized aspects of a civilian bureaucracy that is used to wipe out bourgeois democratic rights, the individual rights of people, the rights of collective people, and with the same coercive apparatuses attacking existing communist parties, trade unions, and other democratic progressive organizations within the state. In order to really build support for these attacks on the people, they do still need to amass a following to gain that popular support. And they steal phrases from the revolutionary movement while simultaneously brutally attacking the very same movement. And when in power, the fascist clique aims for the total elimination of its opponents. Again, the progressive movement, the communist parties, trade unions, labor organizations, and other democratic organizations. In this, what Professor Sison says, and again emphasizes, is that this fascist state is really the ruling classes grasping for power and implementing violent and coercive means for rule. They are like, yeah, really clamoring for what is left of their leadership or whatever among the ruling classes, in the face of growing genuine revolutionary movements for social change with workers at the helm. So the ruling classes sort of in a panic, understanding that their grip on society is weakening because the power of the revolutionary movements, the people pushing for progressive change are gaining favor. And so this is their attempt to control. In the second section, we see Professor Sison apply this analysis to the Philippines in the fascist state under Marcos. Here, he discusses Marcos's rise to power, Marcos Sr.'s rise to power, how his masterful manipulation of the corrupt political system in place in the Philippines eventually led to, one, his own amassing of gross capital and wealth through plunder of resources, foreign loans, and pocketing the people's money, and two, his fascist dictatorial rule in the Philippines we saw under martial law. We see in Marcos's rule the features of fascism that Professor Sison lays out in the beginning, this ruling elite autocrat, where we saw Marcos really claw himself into this position, who is rabidly anti-communist, anti-worker, anti-people. Again, the recipient of Marcos' ire, especially under the martial law, were the democratic and progressive movements in the Philippines and other everyday people, the thousands of victims of martial law. In the use of a coercive apparatus of the state, when he became president, he made himself the Secretary of Defense. He changed the Constitution to allow himself longer term as president, and eventually declared this 14-year-long martial law that resulted in thousands of killings, disappearances, and imprisonment. He used phrase mongering to appeal to the masses of people who were facing dire conditions of poverty and hunger with his bagong lipunan, new society branding. And throughout his role, he also knew how to play the field with garnering US support for his schemes in exchange for access to territory and resources. But when it became clear that it was no longer tenable for the US to support a fascist dictator, the US backed off. And so when the people rose up and ousted the Marcoses, as Professor Sison points out, it was an all-out offensive for both legal and illegal organizations, contributed to the family's eventual ouster from Malacanang. And then this brings us into the context and time that Professor Sison writes this again, just shortly after the ouster, in the section, The Possible Emergence of a Fascist State. Here, Professor Sison explains that Marcos's rule was only really possible because of the existing problems that face Philippine society, namely US imperialism's grip on the Philippines, feudalism, and bureaucrat capitalism. And a sobering reminder that while the Marcoses were ousted, these very same problems continued under Cory Aquino, the chosen replacement for the Marcos. And many of the Marcos loyalists within the Philippine civilian bureaucracy remained in their various positions. And so the peaceful revolution resulted in a change of figureheads, but the mechanism for fascism continued to fester throughout Philippine government. And because of the lack of genuine social and political change from the people power uprising, this is how we come to a Philippines that has seen the return of the Marcoses, why Duterte still is supported by millions of Filipinos. And this is how the suppression and attacks of not only the revolutionary movement, but also the legal democratic movements continue on. What is stark, and I think a testament to Professor Sison's solid analysis of fascism, is that this was written 40 years, almost 40 years ago now, and yet the manifestations of fascism really do ring true, especially under the past regimes, Marcos and Duterte. You can switch out Marcos Sr. to Marcos Jr. and many of the same policies that uphold the interests of the ruling class, like more profit, more exploitation, more plunder, foreign loans, increasing debt, continue on. Under Duterte, we saw the implementation of the US-inspired counterinsurgency program, the whole of nation approach, the implementation of the anti-terror law, the war on drugs, which is really the war on the poor. Under Marcos Sr., again, we had Bagong Lipunan, but under Marcos Jr., we have Bagong Pilipinas, where he is really feigning democracy, all the while human rights violations, the continuation of these counterinsurgency programs, the continuation of the war on drugs, and violations of international humanitarian law continue. And between the Marcoses and Dutertes, we're seeing this vying for consolidation of power that is resulting in a political theater that will no doubt result in more violence to come as they try and win various seats in power as the midterm elections comes to in the Philippines. We're also seeing the US really back the Marcos regime with the increase of military and security assistance, the return of US bases through the EDCA sites, more and more war games in the Philippines, and to assert dominance in the imperialist conflict between the US and China. In turn, fascist violence is enacted on the Filipino people. Again, these extrajudicial killings, more and more aerial bombardments, disappearances and abductions of activists. This very modest 5-page piece on fascism really does bring clarity to the history of fascism and where we can place the Philippines and its various fascist dictators in that context. And as an anti-fascist movement, as Malaya Movement USA, rooted in a long legacy of anti-fascist Filipino organizers here in the US, Professor Sison's writings, this specific text, will be and have been in the critical to our work, and we're really excited for our membership across the country to really take up this study and support in any way we can to really proliferate the incredible work that Professor Sison has put together. So, salamat ulit sa pag-imbita sa amin. Thank you so much for inviting us. Unfortunately, I cannot stay for the rest of the launch, but looking forward to hearing reflections and feedback for this. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tabitha, from Malaya, really sharing like your your review and also like what your thoughts are from this book launch. And as we continue to share more from other reviewers, please also keep in mind for those that are able to stay. Unfortunately, Tabitha won't be able to answer questions for our Q&A. But for the other upcoming speakers, please input some questions that you may have in our chat as well. Okay, with that, thank you again, Tabitha, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. But with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to our next speaker. Let me go ahead and pull up their bio really quickly. I'm sorry, 1 second. Here we go. The next speaker we'll have today is Sheen from Norotol. Sheen is a member of Norotol for Korean community development. They're also a law student and militant unionist. Norotol is an organization of diasporic Koreans organizing for a liberated world, a world free of imperialism and Korea's national liberation. We recently launched our U.S. Out of Korea campaign to stop U.S. aggression towards our people and to consolidate even more power towards an anti-imperialist movement that demands U.S. out of Korea, U.S. out of everywhere. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Sheen for our next reviewer of the book.
Yeah, hi everyone, and Joseph, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Shin representing Naruto. It's deceptive. I know it's spelled Shin, but we at Naruto are really excited to be in community with you all. And we are reviewing kind of two pieces, two articles by ILPS. One is U.S. imperialism's drive to annihilate the DPRK, the ILPS statement. And we salute and support the DPRK and the Korean people for standing against U.S. nuclear threats, sanctions, and provocations. And so these are two, I mean, I found extremely historically materialist works by Professor Sison that really describes the US's saber rattling, these reckless military exercises, these exercises for preemptive nuclear strikes on the Korean Peninsula. And this is an analysis from 2017 that is still, in a lot of ways, extremely evergreen today. The ILPS statement comes a day after, in 2017, in response to kind of the US combined forces military exercises, this annual exercise that the US Combined Forces Command and the South Korean military performed together called Uchi Freedom Guardian. This year was Freedom Shield. But essentially it's these exercises that practice war on the Korean Peninsula, a war that would bleed out right into all of Asia and would in no uncertain terms mean the genocide of the Korean people or nuclear weapons to get involved. And Professor Sison describes it extremely well, right? That is, we stand against US imperialism, that South Korea is inherently kind of a puppet of US imperialism. The DPRK has never been recognized diplomatically by the US, and it has constantly faced annihilation through sanctions, through missile systems, through kind of intelligence gathering, and even the placement of 28,500 troops and thousands of acres of military bases in South Korea today, serving as a kind of constant threat to the DPRK's existence and a huge roadblock to Korean sovereignty. And so I'll talk a bit kind of about some things that have changed since 2017 and connecting kind of Naruto's campaign, US out of Korea, to this. So Naruto was founded in 1999 in New York City by Korean diaspora who came together as a result of KEEP, which is the Korean Education and Exposure Program that used to hold delegations to the DPRK. And were originally plugged into local Korean communities in New York to provide things like healthcare clinics, a daycare, etc. And this is kind of taking place around the 1980s, the late 1990s. It came after decades of struggle against a US-backed dictatorship in South Korea. So Naruto now as it stands is now in New York City, LA, and the Bay, and we're really excited to be in kind of solidarity with the global struggle. And so kind of go back to it again, the struggle against bloodthirsty US imperialism is evergreen. Much of what Professor Sison and ILPS stated in 2017 is more than true. But there are some things that have changed since then, and it's important to kind of pin our analysis on what has changed. In 2017, we were seeing the aggression of the Trump administration, and Moon, the current president the president then in South Korea, was taking a slightly more reconciliatory stance towards North Korea. In 2018, that's when Moon had talked with Kim. And later that year, Kim talked with Trump. And eventually the talks kind of fell apart, as we know, right? Because the Trump and the US failed to negotiate meaningfully with the DPRK. And since coming to power, Biden has made the situation exponentially worse by holding more war exercises and establishing new military alliances in the area. So the biggest one is JACUS, which is this strange imperialist combo of Japan, US, and Australia expanding their operations there. This is, of course, at the same time, right, that the genocide is occurring right now in Palestine. And so while there is kind of this outward, very open funding and greenlighting of Israeli genocide in Palestine, the US and its allies are consolidating strategy and the material for a possible war in Asia. And so it's kind of this dual front that we are fighting against. As recently as a couple weeks ago, for the first time, a South Korea, a Republic of Korean drone was spotted over Pyongyang, the capital of the DPRK. And of course, currently Yoon Suk-yeol is president of South Korea, of the Republic of Korea. I'll call it ROK for concession for here on out. That is kind of moving towards this unification doctrine, but one that would attempt to capture the DPRK under the capitalist regime of the Republic of Korea and the US. It is a war of aggression. It is a war of violence that is absolutely at odds with Korean sovereignty. And so in 2017, where we had these military exercises kind of annually, they have continued amidst mass Korean dissent every year. And now in 2024, we have the US and South Korea signing and creating the Nuclear Consultative Group, which is this group tasked with creating war plans for the ROK and the US militaries to actually officially carry out a nuclear strike against North Korea. And they've rehearsed the same drill called Iron Mace 24 at the beginning of August. And I'm kind of raising this to say that you do not make the preparations for nuclear war without that being a possibility. And there's no such thing as a defensive war, as they claim, when the US has been the sole aggressor, as we know from you all and our comrades in the Philippines, right? That this kind of constant boosting, bolstering is nothing but imperialist aggression for imperialist war. And our campaign is very, very interconnected, I think, to Bayan's own US out of Philippines campaign. The same US rebalancing of forces from the Middle East to the Asia Pacific is as true as it was in 2020, in 2012, in 2017, to the peace to now. The US is actually further continuing to move towards nuclear exercises and consolidating its forces en masse. And we see, for example, just a few weeks ago, the DPRK actually demolished its roads to defend themselves from possible invasion. One of the points made by ILPS is that the DPRK is acting to preserve sovereignty, that it is acting defensively, and that, quote, we hold US imperialism and its South Korean puppets responsible for creating the extremely volatile situation in the Korean Peninsula at present, end quote. Dodoto stands by this analysis. And our campaign kind of builds upon that to assert its position in a more anti-imperialist movement. I'm approaching time, I think, so I'll talk very quickly about our demands. One, we demand the full and permanent withdrawal of US troops and weapon systems from Korea. We demand all Korean land, water, and airspace appropriated for the US military to be returned to the Korean people. That is, Korea is a military occupation zone. It is filled with 28.5K troops, 62 military bases. It is filled with struggle by farm workers, by laborers, by the masses against establishments of new military bases, establishment of anti-missile systems by the US that pollute the environment, that take our land, and that suck our capital from our labor. Two, we demand an end to all US-South Korea alliances, such as JACUS, which are testing points and also allied very much with US-Philippines collaboration. We demand an end to all US military exercises in Korea. We demand all sanctions against North Korea be lifted. And four, we demand an end to the war economy. And so this is all kind of to come full circle and say that the struggle very much is alive in a slightly different form as it was in 2017, and that we see in many ways history repeating itself. And I think what we are working for, what Dudto is working for alongside you all, is not just for a sovereign Korea, right, but for all the colonized to rise up and to embrace the path of anti-imperialism, our task together, that we kind of recognize the coy, really cunning nature of US imperialism, and that as it is bloodthirsty and rabid as we see it right now in Palestine, we know that it has far and long extended that violence into Asia and is making no moves of stopping and is moving and escalating towards war. And that, of course, our task is the same. It is to organize our masses. And I think what Professor Sison and all our comrades here know, and we have been saying for a while. So that's kind of like our take. Like that is, it was a really great piece to read. Really excited for the rest of the project. Doruto would just quickly plug a movie screening event on November 17 at 6 p.m. at the East Side Arts Alliance in Oakland, to kind of with funds going towards Palestinian mutual aid. And we agree with and reiterate the call for a campaign that exposes the US and unites our analyses that a struggle is won, our front must be united 100-fold. US out of Korea, US out of the Philippines, US out of everywhere. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Shin. Yeah, I think that's a really great way. We want to really great review of like this particular article, and really highlighting that, yeah, there is this analysis that we're seeing, that we can really be united wherever, right, against U.S. imperialism, as we're really identifying that U.S. imperialism is really the number one terrorist across the world, no? And so as as we go into the next, actually, I'll go ahead and just introduce our next speaker, or next reviewer from the International League of People's Struggle. And this will actually tie pretty well to the next article that they'll be reading, which is The People's Struggle Against War. So seeing more of an international scope as well. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Nusha. So Nusha serves on the International Coordinating Committee and as the General Secretary of the International League of People's Struggles U.S. country chapter. So the International League of People's Struggle is a global alliance of anti-imperialist and democratic organizations fighting to raise higher the unity and cooperation of the anti-imperialist struggles towards addressing the pressing issues facing the people and the ultimate root of these issues, imperialism. ILPS currently has over 400 member organizations in over 45 countries. So let's go ahead and welcome them.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And much appreciation to Bayan for inviting ILPS to speak and react to these very important texts. And thank you so much to Malaya and Noruto for starting us off. So as Joseph mentioned, the article that I'll be reacting to is called The People's Struggle Against War. This particular article, similarly to place it in the historical context, was written in 1999. And for those who aren't familiar, or as a refresher for those who are, it's really important to look at what was happening in the world in the 90s and then even the transition to the 2000s. The 90s was really a period in which the world socialist revolution and the world anti-imperialist struggles were facing a particular period of retreat and disorientation, and the capitalist system was waging a concerted and aggressive attack against this movement. And so this paper is emerging at a time where our struggles were striving to re-clarify our analysis of imperialism, our analysis of capitalism, and our understanding of war, and cohere again around that clarity in order to re-advance the struggles. So while this is a period of retreat, what I'll note preemptively is this, we were decisive and are decisive to once again advance the struggle and regroup. in that regard, I do want to briefly note kind of the outline of this article. It begins with sort of a brief understanding of the development of imperialism from capitalism, and an explicit understanding of imperialism as the source of war. It then proceeds to discuss and clarify the various trends in this development and how that is leading to more wars and bigger wars. But then most importantly, it doesn't stop there, but in fact makes clear then the title, which is The People's Struggle Against War. That is to say, what do we do about it? What is our task to combat this? And so I do want to note the opener, which I think is a phrase perhaps people have learned or heard before or used before, but is a good reminder. It opens with the simple sentence, imperialism means war. And it says that it is necessary for us to comprehend the nature and history of imperialism as the source of war and confront the current reality of a worsening new world disorder and the spreading scourge of war. So in the sort of first part of the text, it really lays out, right? Imperialism developed out of capitalism. It was the transition from the sort of early industrial, quote unquote, free market capitalism, where we saw because of the nature of capitalist competition, a greater concentration of production, and the greater concentration into the hands of fewer and fewer people, and increasingly a smaller and smaller ruling class, who emerge as the sort of monopoly bourgeoisie, take an increasingly important role dominating the economy and politics of the world. And what's really important is that we address the major contradiction of capitalism, given its nature and its structure. And this contradiction is especially relevant even today. But that is the contradiction between the fact that we have the social nature of production, right? So the way that value is actually generated is collective and social. But the ownership of the means of production and the ownership and accumulation of that value is private. And that creates a lot of major issues for the people of the world. Number one is that it creates a condition where the capitalists are constantly fighting to gain more and more control over the economy in order to maximize their profits. And in that regard, they are also seeking to, as much as possible, decrease the wages of workers. They're fighting for more and more control of that market, more and more control of the productive capacity, more access to labor, and so on and so forth. And so due to this drive, we see that in the rise of imperialism, the capitalist class was no longer confined to particular national economies, but started to spread themselves across the entire world. And so even with the rise of monopoly capitalism, what Sison notes very clearly is that this contradiction did not go away, but in fact became sharper and drastically worsened. And so we have this situation where throughout these different periods of time, increasingly further and further, we see more and more of the world encompassed in the fold of the capitalist economic system, and more being brought into the fold of that social production, but more and more people, more and more of that being accumulated in the hands of a smaller and smaller concentration. And what's really important for us to understand is that as long as that contradiction exists between that social nature of production and the private nature of accumulation, there will continue to be this further tendency to concentrate production and capital into the hands of fewer and fewer people, the continued necessity of the ruling class to compete for greater and greater spheres of economic and political influence. And so as such, as long as this contradiction exists, and as long as it continues to worsen in the period of monopoly capitalism, there will always be the plague of imperialist war. And that's because we know that the expansionist nature of capitalism means that it really needs to consistently strive to accumulate more surplus value. And this sort of competition is continually heightening because in the era of imperialism, the capitalists are fighting over more access to raw materials to plunder, more areas to invest in, more markets and spheres of influence and hegemony, and of course, a reserve army of labor. But they are confronted with the reality that there are physical limitations in the world. the world is not infinite. And so as they're continually trying to expand, at some point, the world is already divided up. It's already divided up amongst these various monopoly capitalists. And so as a result of this, in this sort of condition, the capitalists have to address that. And so what do we do? What do the capitalists do in a situation where the world is already divided? They're constantly driving to produce more and more against the physical limitations of the world. Well, we have two major problems. One is that as they are continually producing more and more, they face constriction and limitations in the market. And increasingly reach that limitation. And so that results in crisis. And so what's really important here is that crisis is not a spontaneous occurrence, but is actually built into the mechanics of how imperialism operates. And so in response to that crisis, the capitalists need to figure out how to redivide the world to confront that limitation. But in a situation where the world is already divided, and the sort of various economic means of fighting for power are no longer possible, the only solution is imperialist war. Imperialist war is very beneficial to the capitalists in the short term because on the one hand, it creates that opportunity to redivide the world system. But on the other hand, it's also quite profitable because war is really good at destroying things. And if you destroy things, someone has to invest in building them. So the capitalists are able to reap the gains at the expense of the people. But again, this system is this solution is very short term and is very unstable. And so what we also see as we transition into the sort of second part of this article is that the crisis of capitalism becomes increasingly big, increasingly destructive and increasingly detrimental. And as a result of that, these conflicts between the rival capitalists become increasingly hostile and more aggressive and provocative in the way of both fascism domestically and war abroad. And this is also why it's important for us to relate the understanding of imperialist war to the discussion of fascism. Both of these things are, in essence, a result of the fact that the imperialist system continues to push itself into further self-made crisis. And as the ruling class aims to defend its own interests, it results to unleashing this fascism domestically and propagates it around the world in these increasingly provocative and aggressive wars. And so fascism and war are fundamentally a result of capitalist crisis. And so to kind of summarize a little bit, after talking about the development, Sison goes on to explain, building on that point, why the current system is trending towards more and greater wars, right? And so what we understand is that amidst this sort of severe crisis, we know that the imperialist powers resorted to fascism and dictatorship to intensify their ability to exploit the workers and toiling people, and to carry out brutal attacks against the various just revolutionary resistance led by the working class. And so we see this rising fascism, rising war provocations amidst this crisis. As the sort of parasitism of the imperialist system continues, as the decay and crisis progress, we also see the fact that even in this current period, we can characterize it as a period of prolonged crisis and economic stagnation, which is most recently initiated by the financial collapse in 2008. But this is just the most recent chain of the capitalist crisis, and it's rooted in, again, that issue of overproduction and that major contradiction of capitalism. And so what we see since the 90s, since when this article was written, is that the trends that Sison laid out have only become more and more true and more relevant. Since the 90s, there have been ceaseless violent wars all around the world, principally instigated by US imperialism, as it attempts to assert its economic and political and military hegemony. We saw after the formal collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s that the US-led NATO alliance really ramped up armed conflicts in Eastern Europe as an effort to weaken Russia and those within the sphere of influence in the former Warsaw Pact. We saw the launch in 2001 of the War on Terror, framework as a means to cover its continued provocations and violations of sovereign territories and the standing up of countless puppet regimes. And especially since the 2010s, we've seen the US label China and Russia as some of the lead rivals to its current power. And so we've seen it ramp up not just economic competition against them, but most recently active military against them. And just to give a number to this, since 2001, there are estimates that the US has spent between $7 and $8 trillion in overseas wars. And so just think about how many zeros are in that number, and think about that's where the money is going, and think about what it isn't going to. And so in this current period, we see the US is waging regional wars all around the world, but we also see the trend of the US getting increasingly bellicose and seeking to draw us into the brink of world war. And it has to be said very clearly that this will be detrimental to the people first and foremost. So that's my rather bleak picture of the development of imperialism, and I hope it's clear for us why imperialism means war in one sense, right? So long as imperialism exists, it will continue to produce crisis, and it will continue to produce the basis for war. But there's another reason why you might hear the phrase imperialism means war, and that relates us to the closing part of what is discussed in the article, which is, again, what do we do about it? What is our response? What are the tasks, right? And so I wanted to briefly quote the opening paragraph of the last portion of the article, which starts off with, sorry, let me pull it up. It says, sorry, I lost the page, bear with me. It says, the worsening crisis of the world capitalist system and the intolerable oppression and exploitation impel the proletariat and people of the world to struggle against imperialism, and therefore against war in the industrial capitalist countries and in the farmer socialist countries and in the countries with anti-imperialist governments and so many depressed raw materials exporting countries. And so despite this crisis, the people are called upon to actively resist. And so in understanding this sort of system, we also need to look at the current conditions, right? Both in the imperialist countries and in the semi-colonies around the world, the workers are becoming more conscious, more militant, and more organized. We've seen an increasing growth of strikes and unions, which comes amidst the backdrop of some of the most aggressive and attacks globally against the trade union movement. We also see the resurgence and advance of national liberation struggles around the world, such as those in Palestine or the Philippines, in India, and that have actively been advancing these struggles, many of which have even elevated to the level of taking up the principal form of struggle against a violent enemy with the full sort of militarized state at its disposal, right? They've taken up armed struggle, directly confronting the state violence of the capitalist regime. And we've seen movements justifiably and more resolutely asserting their national independence and sovereignty in the face of imperialist efforts to violate this sovereignty, such as the just struggle of the Korean people as they strive for to remove the presence of the US imperialists on their peninsula and unite the entire Korean people under a free Korea. So we see the particular conditions of resurgence. And so when we say imperialism means war, it has a dual meaning. It also is a call to action. The imperialists are decisive to wage war against the people, and so the people must be decisive to wage active struggle against them. And so to kind of wrap up, because I'm hitting up on time, I just want to lay out some of the tasks before us. One, we have to study. We have to be diligent in our study. In the full range of what that means. We need to have a good grasp of the conditions as they are developing, because this is the reference point from which we will wage our struggle. And in fact, it's really important to have unity and clarity in our analysis. And so when we look at the crisis of imperialism, war, and fascism, we need to understand and help the people at large understand that, that really these are not sporadic or spontaneous occurrences, but that they are rooted in an underlying system. And if we properly grasp these conditions and grasp that underlying system, we also then can have clarity on the strategy and tactics necessary to wage struggle, to overcome this system and get at the root. Additionally, we all need to elevate each of the respective struggles, drawing in more and more people together to take up the fights to wage different types of fighting campaigns, which strike blows at the multiplicity of ways which the imperialist system expresses itself, whether that is the active struggle of the workers in their workplaces, whether that is those national liberation struggles at the forefront, whether that is the different movements against the to oppose the various fascist attacks against the people. What we need to make clear is that these struggles must be further elevated and grow. And then most importantly, we have the task to unite all of the various expressions of these struggles together and make clear that in essence, these are all part of the anti-imperialist struggle. And that the current system, while it may look bleak, it has also made very clear who our enemy is. And if we are able to wield these together in a cohesive manner, we can then direct it squarely at our enemy, which is the ruling class in the imperialist system. And so what Sison also makes clear to hopefully wrap up in this period, we have to build a mass movement. We have to build a united front with clarity around the anti-imperialist perspective, and we have to wage fighting campaigns. What Sison says is that the crisis of imperialism and war will not result in the collapse of the imperialist system of its own accord. What it does is it makes the conditions favorable for our people's struggle, and that if we seize on that, and if we take our task seriously, it's only under those conditions that we are able to overthrow the imperialist system and free ourselves and free all people from the plague that is imperialist war and fascism. And of course, most importantly, then to build a new system, to build a genuinely free world that serves the interests of the people, which is socialism. And so those are the tasks before us. I am a couple minutes over time, so I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to pass it back to Joseph. But thank you all for your time. And I'll plug some resources in the chat as well for you all to follow up with.
No, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Nusha. And I think it's as you're really saying, it's the imperialism means war and like the dual meaning. I really appreciate that, like sharing there, right? It's imperialism is gonna wage their wars against each other and wars of aggression, but also it's a call for the people as well, right? And so I think as we wrap up all of the different reviews that we got from today, once again, let's thank all of our reviewers from today, which is from Tabitha from Malaya Movement, Shin from Noruto, and Nusha from the International League for People's Struggle. And so thank you again for your insightful and very thoughtful remarks on each of the articles that you covered in your reviews, and also really giving spotlight to just a little bit of the book that is launching from Jose Maria Sison. With that, we're actually going to open up for our Q&A session. So just a reminder that we are having questions for today. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first question for tonight, which is, let's see, let's start with this one. So the title of the book, right, is Fascism, State Terrorism, and Wars of Aggression are all heightening. How have these impacted your country and your people? I think we briefly talked about this, but yeah, if either of our speakers wanted to share a little bit about that, and then also like connecting also from the book, if there's anything else that you wanted to add on from your initial sharing.
Yeah, I'm happy to hop in here. I mean, I think kind of ideologically, right, that there are so many Koreans, especially those from the Korean War, especially those who kind of remember the legacy and the trauma from Japanese colonialism and the US coup and its brutal war crimes in the Korean War. I think they hold very close this dream of a reunified Korea, because there was one immediately after Japanese colonization that was very much ruined by the US, the People's Republic of Korea. And I think if you look within Korea now, those who are kind of leading the war against reactionary forces in the Republic of Korea are folks who kind of come from that tradition and legacy. So KZTU, which is the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, this extremely militant trade union that has been demonstrating for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I think ideologically, right, that it makes a unified Korea, a sovereign Korea, seem more and more and more far away. You know, there's so many folks who saw kind of Moon and Kim shaking hands, kind of who dreamt of this, and now see it very much being torn away. And that's not to overstate like the physical and economic impact, right? So Sosongri, which is this longtime old farming village in Korea, has been fighting for 8 years against THAAD, that anti-missile system I mentioned earlier. That is our ancestral homelands being destroyed. That is our waters being polluted, our air being polluted. It is all being funded through Korean taxes. So those giant bases you see are all funded through Korean taxpayers. And so it is Korean laborers who are now giving their capital to empire, and more making that dream of like a Korea that is actually liberated seem harder and harder and harder. And so I think there's this element of like hopelessness that we organizers must constantly fight against. But then there's also like that so much has been lost already. Like we recognize kind of like all the death and the violence of state terrorism, of fascism, that these have very much happened. That we very much have to mobilize around them. But it makes, especially now under Yoon, these conditions are very repressive. They've arrested people under this anti-communist security law, which hasn't been used in years and years and years. And so I think it forces us to be much more flexible in our tactics.
Thank you so much, Shin. Anything that you wanted to add briefly, Nusha?
Yeah, I can add a little bit. Well, I'll just take the opportunity to speak about the United States. I'm not, well, this is not my country, but but I live here, so I'll talk about it as well, because I think this will transition into when we talk about the calls to action. But I think what's really important here, on that last note that I mentioned about making clear who our enemy is, I just wanted to also remind folks, right, that the crisis of imperialism, the rising fascism, the rising war, they're not even beneficial for the majority of the people who live in what is called the United States. And in fact, not only is it not beneficial to them, but it is bad for them. Many of the people who live in this country are migrants who were displaced and forced to leave their country due to the issues of war, due to the active aggression of the imperialist system, the chokeholds, etc. That's how my family came here. And for workers in this country, countless are suffering under low wages, having to work multiple jobs, that are still not paying enough. Countless of people are houseless, deprived of their basic rights. And we're even seeing the increasing aggressive attacks on these very migrant communities themselves, these very working communities themselves, and so on. We see the massive degradation of education and the funneling of further resources into the buildup to war. And then we see the domestic fascism all the way down to the workplaces where workers are prevented from being able to organize, or on the campuses where youth are being deprived of genuine education. And in fact, we've seen countless reports from our various communities and member organizations of the all-out military attacks against youth on campus for even asserting that that their university should not be part and parcel of the US war machine, should not be funneling billions of dollars into the war machine and developing the very tools of counterinsurgency. And so I just lay out these examples to put on the table that even those of us who live in this country are feeling the crisis. And while that's very bad, it again, I hope, also makes clear how numerically small our enemy is. So many of us have a stake in this game. And so I think that's what's important to recall and to remind people. This isn't something happening over there. It's something happening everywhere. The issue of war is manifesting all around the world. And so I just wanted to add that to the table, but thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's go ahead and we have one other question that we wanted to share. I think just to highlight from this new book as well, right? So Jose Maria Sison has also stated that there is a resurgence of the world proletarian revolution, and I think Nusha, you kind of spoke briefly to this, but for both of you, how do you see our struggles coming together and to address our common issues and liberation and liberating the working people around the world?
Well, I just spoke, but I'll talk again if y'all are okay with that. And I'll see if Shin has maybe more to add. I think how do I say this briefly? I think what I would add to what I sort of shared before, I want to elaborate a little bit on what I meant by bringing together and uniting the various struggles and fighting campaigns. What's really important in the face of sort of this crisis is the fact that, well, it's really the people who play the principal role in actually being able to, if organized, address the conditions that they're facing. And the reality of the situation, right, is it's very hard to bring a lot of different people together. But what's really important is to find where the commonalities lie, the common understanding in a principled manner, and actually unite through struggle, right? Not just through discussion, but through actually waging struggle together. So maybe to give some examples, I mean, one that I'm biased about is building alliances. So that's actually where the International League of People's struggle emerged from. It also emerged in the 90s and was formally established in 2001 as an effort to contribute to this systematic bringing together of the various struggles around a common common lines of joint action. But briefly, I'll share some maybe examples of campaigns. Just if you look at this past year alone, two very significant campaigns that I would like to share about. One was a campaign against the Rim of the Pacific military exercises. ILPS had the privilege of being involved in that campaign. It was actually initiated by Bayan and other important alliances like Resist US-led War Movement and the International Women's Alliance. But this was really an effort to unite so many people around confronting one of the most aggressive and largest military exercises that's part of the US's strategy of what it calls its pivot to Asia, where it's really attempting to build up its military capacity and draw more of the governments that are under the US control into the fold of the US military and direct it against China, which it's labeled as one of its main strategic rivals. And so really we were able to bring together people from a wide range of backgrounds and issues and organizing, and even the local communities to confront this particular expression of war and militarism. And then just not even a whole week later, on the other side of this country, there was a similar campaign that we waged simultaneously because NATO was convening in Washington, D.C. And we made clear that NATO is the largest and one of the most aggressive US-led military alliances. And so it was very significant that it was convening there and was really discussing how it would continue to expand, how it would be directing its efforts in line with the US military strategy. And And again, not only was it making plans for how it will cause further destruction around the world, but it also brought with it some of the largest militarization of the city, and resulted in massive displacement of the local communities, the deployment of police and police services and various federal state forces, and really entirely shut down the whole city. And so we were able to bring in not just the traditional anti-war forces, but again, the National Liberation Struggle, various workers' organizations, community organizations, and even international groups together to confront NATO. And the reason I bring up some of these campaigns is we even took it one step further and we said, hey, it's quite significant, the situation that we're in right now. We have one of the largest military exercises happening simultaneous to the convening of one of the largest military alliances, simultaneous to a ramping up of US-backed genocide against the Palestinian people. And all of these conditions of war were converging. And so then what we were really striving to do is, how do we bring in a lot of people together around this shared target? And it was actually through that process of organizing together against a very clear and overt expression of our common enemy that we were also able to engage in discussion, in deep community work, in sharing of analysis and education, and so on. And so I think what I emphasize here is that the best way to build unity and to bring all of these movements together is most importantly through waging joint struggle. And that process of joint struggle allows us to gain experience and practice and common understanding that makes our overall movement stronger and more united. And progressively, we're able to also step by step strike blows at each of these particular parts of the imperialist system, which are an effort to weaken the whole, right? And so I think that's why I bring up the importance of fighting campaigns. Fighting campaigns are really the lifeline for us. So that's my maybe rather rambly response to the question.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Nisha. So unless there's anything else, I see in the chat actually, Shin said our nations are all laboratories for the imperialists, our common enemy. And yeah, absolutely, that's definitely an aspect that we really want to call out, right? That's something that we really want to address as an issue. Unless Shin, if there's anything else you want to add, otherwise we can close the Q&A today since we are running a bit out of time. Okay, perfect. All right. So let's go ahead and pull up the slides again for the rest of today. Which is I'm going to show you all how you can actually avail the book. And so, as we highlighted all of the different reviewers and also even in this brief Q&A hearing from them, it really highlighting how Jose Maria Sison and all of his writings are still relevant to this day, and we're seeing a lot of the connections from what he wrote to what is still happening and how we're continuing to fight against against U.S. imperialism and all of its wars of aggression. And so as you see here, this is how you avail the book. We have this tinyurl.com JMS 27. You can get a paperback copy of the book or an ebook version as well. So yeah, go ahead and get that link. Get the book. Like we said, we only briefly touched on parts of the book, but we really want to encourage everyone to read it. Or hey, Christmas is around the corner for folks that do celebrate it, and or give it as a Halloween gift or treat instead, as Nisha says here. But yeah, this is a great book that to give as a gift, and also a great book to study with your friends and family as well. And so with that, this is the book we recommend. That we've been talking about all day today. And then also we wanted to highlight some of the quick calls to action that some of the organizations said here. So for Malaya USA, their calls were to join the organization, pass the Philippine Human Rights Act, and reject the Philippine Enhanced Resilience Act, or the PERA. And to learn more about that, go to humanrightsph.org. And then for the next one, Norotol, actually, I believe you mentioned that you're having a video screening and speaking more about the U.S. out of Korea campaign. Maybe you can briefly remind us again, Shin, on some of the calls to action.
Yes, pardon my camera being off. The cord is being very odd. But I just wanted to let folks know that we are hosting a movie screening event on November 17th at 6 p.m. At the East Side Arts Alliance in Oakland. The Action Network and whatnot will be sent out shortly, and the flyers will be on all our socials. We're calling it Kimchi Fada for short, but essentially we'll be screening a movie about the Korean struggle, TBD, and we will be selling kimchi as a fundraiser to mutual aid sources in Gaza. So please come through.
Nice. Kimchi fada. Okay. Love it. And then lastly, we'll also be having the ILPS Week of Action. Actually, Nusha, can you speak briefly to this as well?
Yes. In short, I guess to summarize, I'll send some links in the chat and maybe we can send it out afterwards. But as I mentioned, our members and even non-members in their communities have really been waging and elevating various struggles and campaigns throughout this year. For ILPS, one of our main campaigns, which I hope is relevant to the discussion today, is the Defend People's Struggle campaign, which in essence has been working to expose and oppose the various forms of counterinsurgency that the US is unleashing to attack people's movements, and to expose and oppose the various war provocations, such as via NATO or the Rim of the Pacific military exercises and so on, right? And so throughout the waging of this campaign, we've been building up to confront these various sort of overt expressions of attacks against the people. But we also recognize that, unfortunately, this is a US presidential election year. And really, in our view as an alliance, we see that, the elections are really a time where the different factions in the ruling class are competing over who will lead the imperialist war machine for the next 4 years. Our view is that neither of the ruling parties really represent the interests of the people, and in fact are responsible for worsening the conditions of the people. And so as we've been sort of developing these our campaigns work, we have, through the process of waging these campaigns, through the process of engaging with our members, and through the process of going out into the community and talking to people, we have developed what we call the People's Platform, with that perspective that these are the actual genuine issues that the people care about, which you can find on our website. And it's sort of a consolidated expression of the most pressing issues facing the people. But then the call for us as an anti-imperialist alliance is, in order to address those, what we need to do is continue to wage struggles and campaigns around these issues. And so our members have been doing that throughout this year. And so what we wanted to do is then converge all of them again, right? As these struggles are being waged on the ground locally, how do we relate to a national election? And so we have called for a week of action under the banner of Build the People's Movement, Fight War, Repression, and Genocide. And this will be a coordinated series of national actions across the country, following and around the US elections, as an opportunity to then bring together all of these various local expressions of the campaign and direct them towards the number one enemy of the people, which is the imperialists themselves. And so for anyone here, if there's ILPS members in your area, which there's a high chance that there is, we encourage you to join up with us, join up with our members in our regional formations, and participating in these mass actions being waged. But if you're not a member and you're not in an area, we also encourage you to take up action relevant to the campaigns and struggles that you're waging in your community. And we invite you to join us under this broad call to action. It doesn't have to be November 6th to 10th. We have some people doing it as the sort of what do we call it? The precursor. So they'll be doing it on like the 3rd and the 4th and 5th. And so please join up with us. And really see this as an opportunity to bring to the forefront the struggles that you're waging, bring to the forefront the issues. And really, this is also a chance for us to, again, take seriously the task to bring the broadest range of people into the fold of the struggle. We know that there's a lot of people who maybe don't consider themselves anti-imperialists, but they are very concerned with these relevant issues right now. And in this country, all that has ever been presented to them as an option and a solution is to vote for the Democrats or the Republicans. And so we want to use this as an opportunity where the people at large are rightfully engaged in politics and rightfully wanting to take up action and give them an alternative, a genuine solution. So if you would like to check out more details, you can go to, it's very simple. Our website and social media is just ilps.us. So you can check it out there, where you'll see this call to action as well as an action toolkit. There's a way to sign up if you're doing an action so that we can uplift and promote it. And you can always reach out to us if you would like to get linked up. And then, of course, the shameless plug. If you're in an organization already that isn't a member of ILPS, we encourage you to continue to do joint work with us, wage these campaigns with us. And if you would like to join, you can check out on the website and a link tree that I'll share a way to join the Alliance. But regardless, we would like to work with you. And if you're not a member of an organization, please join one. Join one, whether the ones who are speaking today or any of the plethora of genuine people's organizations, because that's really our way out. That's really our way out of the system. So I'll plug some of those in the chat, and folks can reach out through DM or email, and we can get linked up and chat. So yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And last but not least, for Buy in USA, we have our US Out of the Philippines campaign. And this is the tiny URL to join the campaign and also like be involved with our campaign, as well as we're, seeing that connection of US imperialism is really in the depth of within our country as well, with all of its different bases and such. And so with that, just really putting emphasis that, U.S. imperialism has been the biggest terrorist force in the world since the end of World War II, like it was said in the opening of this book. And, with this upcoming election, none of that will change. No matter Harris or Trump, they're the two sides of the same coin. And so really encouraging people to read this book from Jose Maria Sison to really sharpen our analysis. As as said earlier, one of our biggest things that for us to really advance our people's movements and our liberation movements is by actually studying and sharpening our own analysis on one, the enemy, and their tactics, their strategies on how they're advancing their imperialist war games and wars of aggression and fascism on the rise. But also, it's important for us to study each other's people's movements as well, and for us to really figure out how we can find unities and build strength through that. So with that, once again, thank you all for being here today, and thank you for joining us. And here is the link again for the book, Fascism, State Terrorism, and Wars of Aggression. We look forward to hearing your sharings on how this book was. Feel free to even tag us at Buy in USA on like your own perspectives on the book as well on social media. And so I'm seeing that take a selfie and tag us. The tinyurl.com/JMS27. And that should take you to a Barnes and Noble link there. So there you go. All right. Thank you everyone for tonight, and looking forward to seeing you all at the next book launch, or when we all see you at other future buy-in or ILPS, or even for Nototol's actions as well. Thank you and have a good day.